Marcus Wellington stood at the grand window of his fifth-floor office, watching the city move beneath him like a living machine. His company had just secured another million-dollar deal, yet the victory felt hollow. The brass nameplate on his mahogany desk read, Chief Executive Officer, but lately those letters felt more like chains than achievements. His phone buzzed constantly with congratulatory messages, but he couldn't bring himself to read them. The real weight pressing on his chest had nothing to do with business. It was waiting for him at home in the form of a 7-year-old boy with dark curls and eyes that held oceans of unspoken words. His son Daniel, Marcus had built an empire from nothing. He'd started with a small tech startup in his garage 20 years ago and turned it into a multinational corporation. He knew how to read market trends, negotiate with ruthless competitors, and inspire thousands of employees. But he had no idea how to reach his own child. Daniel had been born deaf. The doctors delivered the diagnosis when he was 18 months old, after his wife Sarah had spent countless sleepless nights wondering why their baby didn't respond to sounds. Marcus remembered that day in the specialist's office, the way the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Sarah had cried quietly beside him while the doctor explained cochlear implants, speech therapy, and sign language. Marcus had nodded mechanically, already calculating costs and researching the best specialists money could buy. But money couldn't buy what Daniel really needed. Marcus knew that now, though he'd been slow to accept it. He'd thrown resources at the problem like he would at any business challenge. The best hearing aids, top therapists, private tutors. Their home had become a revolving door of specialists, each promising progress, each leaving behind detailed reports that Sarah filed away in color-coded binders. Sarah had tried to get Marcus to learn sign language with her. She'd signed up for classes, bought books, practiced in front of the mirror. But Marcus was always too busy. There was always another meeting, another crisis, another opportunity that couldn't wait. He told himself he was providing for his family, securing their future. Deep down, though, he knew the truth. He was hiding. The silence in his own home terrified him. Not the physical silence, but the emotional void that grew wider each day between him and his son. Daniel would look at him with those expressive eyes, hands moving in gestures Marcus couldn't understand, and Marcus would feel like a stranger in his own family. He'd smile, pat the boy's head, and retreat to his study, where the language of business made sense. Their previous nanny had quit last month. Mrs. Henderson had been with them for 3 years, a pleasant woman in her 50s who followed instructions well enough. She fed Daniel, supervised his therapy sessions, and kept him safe. But Marcus had noticed how she mostly communicated through simple gestures and written notes. She'd never actually learned to sign properly. When Daniel tried to tell her something complex, she'd just smile and nod, then hand him a toy or turn on the television. Sarah had wanted to fire her months ago, but Marcus had resisted. Mrs. Henderson was reliable, punctual, and professional. Wasn't that enough? But then Sarah showed him the video. She'd recorded Daniel playing alone in his room, talking to himself in sign language, having entire conversations with imaginary friends because no one else in the house could really talk with him. The boy's hands had moved with such grace and passion, telling stories to empty air. Marcus had watched his son's face light up with joy and laughter at his own jokes, and something inside him cracked. Mrs. Henderson gave her notice the next week, citing family obligations. Marcus suspected Sarah had made it clear her services were no longer wanted. Now they needed someone new, and Sarah had insisted on handling the hiring process herself. She'd interviewed dozens of candidates, all with impressive resumes and references, but she kept saying no. Marcus didn't understand what she was looking for until the day she hired Rosa Martinez. Rosa had walked into their home on a Tuesday morning with a simple black bag and worn shoes that had seen better days. She was in her mid-40s with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. Her resume was modest compared to the others. She'd worked as a housekeeper, a caregiver, and a nursing assistant. Her references were from middle-class families, not wealthy estates. Marcus had been skeptical when Sarah told him this was the woman she'd chosen. That first morning, Marcus had been running late for a board meeting. He'd rushed through the foyer, barely glancing at the new employee as Sarah introduced her. Rosa had smiled politely and said something he didn't catch. He was already thinking about his presentation, the quarterly reports, the shareholders who expected miracles. Daniel had been in the living room, building an elaborate castle with his blocks. The boy was meticulous, arranging each piece with careful precision. He hadn't noticed the new person in the house yet. Marcus had paused at the door, briefcase in hand, and called back to Sarah. Make sure she understands the routine. Daniel has therapy at 3. Sarah had given him a look he couldn't quite read. She understands more than you think. Marcus dismissed the comment and left. The black town car waited at the curb, and his driver had the door open before he reached the bottom step. The world of board meetings and profit margins swallowed him whole, and he forgot about the new maid until that evening. He came home after dark, as usual. The house was quiet, lights glowing warm against the autumn evening. Marcus loosened his tie as he walked through the door, expecting the usual scene. Daniel would be in bed, Sarah would be reading in the sitting room, and the new maid would be finishing up in the kitchen. Instead, he heard something he'd never heard in his house before. Laughter. Not just any laughter, but Daniel's pure, unrestrained joy. The sound stopped Marcus in his tracks. His son rarely laughed out loud. The boy had learned early that he couldn't hear his own voice, couldn't modulate the volume, and it made him self-conscious. His laughter was usually silent, expressed through his whole body, but without sound. Marcus followed the noise to the kitchen. What he saw there made him freeze in the doorway, invisible and unnoticed. Rosa stood at the counter, rolling out dough for something. Her hands moved in a blur, not with the dough, but in the air. She was signing. Fluent natural sign language that flowed like water. And Daniel sat on a stool beside her, his little hands flying in response, his face animated in a way Marcus had never seen. The boy was telling a story, his expressions exaggerated and delightful, and Rosa was responding, laughing, adding to the tale with her own signs. Marcus watched from the doorway as his son came alive in a way he'd never witnessed. Daniel's entire body participated in the conversation with Rosa. His eyebrows raised and lowered for emphasis, his shoulders shrugged to show confusion, his head tilted with curiosity. This wasn't the quiet, withdrawn child who sat at the dinner table pushing food around his plate. This was a boy bursting with personality, humor, and intelligence. Rosa noticed him first. Her hand stilled mid-sentence, and she smiled warmly in his direction. Daniel turned to see what had caught her attention, and the light in his eyes dimmed slightly when he saw his father. The boy's hands dropped to his lap. He gave a small wave, then looked down at the counter. Marcus felt that familiar knife twist of inadequacy. He raised his hand in greeting, managed a smile that felt plastic on his face. Sarah appeared behind him, touching his elbow gently. "Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes, she said quietly. Rosa offered to make her grandmother's recipe. Daniel helped her all afternoon. Marcus nodded, retreating to his study as he always did. But this time he couldn't focus on the stack of papers waiting for him. He kept seeing Daniel's face, so animated and alive, then shuddering closed when his father appeared. How long had it been since his son looked at him with that kind of openness? Had he ever? At dinner, the usual awkwardness settled over the table like fog. Sarah tried to facilitate conversation, speaking to Daniel and translating his signs for Marcus, but it was clumsy, second-hand communication that left everyone feeling frustrated. Daniel ate quickly and asked to be excused. Sarah signed her permission and the boy disappeared upstairs. After Daniel left, Sarah turned to Marcus with an intensity he hadn't seen in months. "Did you see him today?" "Really see him?" Marcus set down his fork. "I saw that the new maid can sign." "That's good. It's what we needed." "Her name is Rosa," Sarah said firmly. "And she's not just a maid. She worked at a school for deaf children for 5 years before the program lost funding. She's fluent in American Sign Language. She's exactly what Daniel has needed his entire life." Marcus felt defensive, though he wasn't sure why. "We've had him in programs. Therapy, tutors, specialists. The best that money can buy. None of that matters if he can't communicate with his own family." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "I've been learning, Marcus. For 4 years I've been taking classes, practicing, trying. But I'm not fluent. I miss things. I can't keep up when he gets excited. And you—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I provide for this family," Marcus said, his voice harder than he intended. "I work 16-hour days so Daniel can have everything he needs." "He doesn't need things, Marcus. He needs his father." The words hung in the air between them. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I have an early meeting tomorrow." He left Sarah sitting alone at the table and climbed the stairs to his bedroom. But sleep didn't come easily. He lay in the dark, thinking about Daniel's face in that kitchen so full of life and joy, thinking about how that joy vanished when his father appeared. The next morning, Marcus came downstairs earlier than usual. He told himself it was to review notes for his meeting, but truthfully, he wanted to observe. He wanted to understand what made Rosa different from all the other caregivers they'd employed. Daniel was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal. Rosa moved around the kitchen preparing school lunch, and her hands never stopped moving. She was signing constantly, narrating what she was doing, asking Daniel questions, making comments about the weather outside. It was seamless, natural. Daniel responded between bites of cereal, his hands forming shapes and patterns that Marcus recognized as language but couldn't comprehend. Rosa was explaining something about clouds, her hands painting pictures in the air. Daniel's eyes were fixed on her, absorbing every gesture. Then the boy signed something that made Rosa laugh, a full, genuine laugh. She signed back quickly, and Daniel giggled, covering his mouth with his hands. Marcus cleared his throat from the doorway. Once again, he was the intruder in his own home. Rosa turned and smiled at him, her hands moving in a greeting. When Marcus just stared blankly, she spoke aloud. "Good morning, Mr. Wellington. Would you like some coffee?" "That's fine, thank you." Marcus poured his own coffee, hyper-aware of the silence that had fallen. Daniel finished his cereal and carried his bowl to the sink, careful not to make eye contact with his father. Rosa signed something to Daniel. The boy looked up at her, then reluctantly at his father. His hands moved in a simple gesture that even Marcus recognized. "Goodbye." Marcus raised his hand in response. It felt pathetic, insufficient. Daniel grabbed his backpack and headed toward the door where the car would take him to his special school. Rosa walked with him, still signing, still engaging him in conversation until the very moment he stepped outside. When she returned to the kitchen, Marcus was still standing there, coffee cup in hand, feeling lost in his own house. Rosa began wiping down the counters, humming softly to herself. After a moment, she spoke without looking at him. "He's a wonderful boy. Very smart, very funny. He has so many stories to tell." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. "I'm glad he has someone who can understand him." Rosa paused in her cleaning and turned to face him directly. Her expression was kind but frank. "Everyone deserves to be understood, Mr. Wellington, especially by their family." There was no judgment in her voice, just simple truth. Marcus set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. "I've provided him with every opportunity, every resource. If that's not enough, I don't know what else I can do." Rosa studied him for a long moment. Then she crossed to a drawer and pulled out a notepad and pen. She wrote something down and handed it to him. "This is the name of a sign language class. It meets Tuesday and Thursday evenings at the community center downtown. I teach it." Marcus looked at the paper in his hand. "I don't have time for classes. My schedule is impossible." "Yes," Rosa said simply. "It is impossible to have a relationship with your son if you cannot speak his language." The bluntness of her statement should have offended him. Instead, it hit him like cold water. Rosa didn't apologize or soften her words. She just returned to her cleaning, leaving him standing there with the paper in his hand and a hollow feeling in his chest. Marcus went to work that day, but he couldn't shake the conversation. During meetings, he found himself thinking about Daniel's hands moving in patterns he couldn't read. During lunch with clients, he remembered his son's laughter in the kitchen. During the drive home, he looked at the notepad paper Rosa had given him, still folded in his jacket pocket. That evening, he came home to find Daniel and Rosa in the backyard. The autumn air was crisp and they were raking leaves into piles. But they weren't just working. They were playing. Rosa would sign something and Daniel would dive into a leaf pile. Then Daniel would sign back and Rosa would pretend to be shocked, throwing leaves in the air. Sarah stood at the kitchen window watching them. Marcus came up beside her and they stood in silence for a moment. "When was the last time we saw him play like that?" Sarah asked softly. Marcus couldn't remember. Had Daniel ever played with such abandon? He searched his memory and came up empty. "She's good with him. She's more than good. She sees him, Marcus. Really sees him, not his disability. Not what he can't do, but who he is." Sarah turned to face her husband. "I gave her a raise today. Doubled her salary." Marcus nodded absently. still watching his son tumble through the leaves. That's fine. I didn't ask permission. You don't need my permission for household decisions. He glanced at Sarah and saw something fierce in her expression. What is it? I'm tired, Marcus. Tired of being the only parent in this house. Tired of making excuses for you to our son. Tired of translating your absence into something that doesn't break his heart. Her voice was steady, but her eyes glistened. Rosa's been here 3 days, and Daniel has smiled more than he has in 3 months. Do you know why? Marcus didn't answer. Because someone finally speaks his language. Someone asks him questions and waits for his answers. Someone treats him like a complete human being instead of a problem to be solved or a project to be managed. The words stung because they were true. Marcus had been treating Daniel like a business problem. Throw money at it, hire experts, measure progress. But his son wasn't a quarterly report. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He wandered downstairs around midnight and found himself in the living room, looking at the photos on the mantel. There were pictures of Daniel as a baby, as a toddler at various birthdays. In every photo from the past few years, the boy looked subdued, his smile polite but not reaching his eyes. Marcus realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd seen his son genuinely happy before Rosa arrived. The next morning was Saturday. Marcus usually went into the office on weekends, but something made him stay home. He found Daniel in the playroom building with Legos. Rosa was there too, sitting on the floor despite her position as household staff. She was helping Daniel construct an elaborate spaceship, her hands moving constantly in conversation. Marcus watched from the hallway, hidden from view. Rosa was asking Daniel about the spaceship's mission. Where would it go? What would the astronauts discover? Daniel's hands flew with excitement, creating stories of distant planets and alien friends. Rosa responded with equal enthusiasm, suggesting plot twists and asking probing questions that made Daniel think deeper about his narrative. It was more than communication. It was connection. Real, meaningful connection that Marcus recognized from his own childhood, from the relationship he'd had with his own father before the old man passed. They'd spent hours in the garage together, working on projects, talking about everything and nothing. Marcus had felt seen, understood, valued. When had he last made Daniel feel that way? When had he last sat on the floor and played with his son? Really played, without checking his watch or thinking about work. Rosa must have sensed his presence because she looked up and met his eyes. Instead of stopping or becoming formal, she signed something to Daniel and pointed toward the doorway. Daniel turned and waved at his father, then signed something. Rosa translated aloud. He wants to know if you'd like to help build the spaceship. Marcus's first instinct was to make an excuse. He had emails to answer, calls to return. But the expectant look on Daniel's face stopped him. The boy wasn't excited exactly, more cautiously hopeful. Like he expected disappointment but couldn't help hoping anyway. Marcus walked into the room and sat down on the floor, feeling awkward in his expensive casual clothes among the scattered toys. Daniel handed him a section of the spaceship and demonstrated how to attach the pieces. Rosa signed something and Daniel nodded enthusiastically. He says this is the engine room, Rosa translated. It needs to be very strong because the spaceship will travel faster than light. Marcus attached the pieces, fumbling a bit. Daniel watched him closely, then reached over to adjust one of the connections. The boy's small hands worked with practiced precision, and Marcus felt a surge of pride. His son was talented, creative, patient with details. When had he noticed these things before? They worked in silence for a while, except it wasn't really silence. Rosa and Daniel continued their conversation in signs, and Rosa would occasionally translate key points for Marcus. He learned that Daniel's spaceship was on a mission to find a planet where everyone could understand each other perfectly. No misunderstandings, no confusion, just clear communication. Marcus felt the metaphor land heavily in his chest. After an hour, Sarah appeared in the doorway with lunch. She looked surprised to see Marcus still there. Sitting on the floor with Legos scattered around him, something flickered across her face. Hope, maybe, or relief. They ate lunch together in the kitchen, and for the first time Marcus could remember, the meal felt almost normal. Rosa facilitated conversation between Daniel and his parents, translating back and forth. Daniel talked about school, about his friends in the deaf community, about a field trip coming up to the science museum. Marcus learned more about his son's life in one lunch than he had in months of distant dinners. After lunch, Daniel asked if his father would play a video game with him. Marcus almost said no, almost retreated to his study. But Rosa caught his eye and gave him a look that was both encouraging and slightly challenging. Marcus found himself nodding yes. The video game was complicated, something about building civilizations and managing resources. Daniel was remarkably good at it, his mind working strategically. He tried to explain the game to his father through gestures and Rosa's translations. Marcus was terrible at it, making rookie mistakes that made Daniel laugh. And hearing that laugh, seeing his son's genuine amusement at his father's incompetence, made Marcus laugh too. For 2 hours they played together. Marcus forgot about his phone, about the office, about everything except the small boy beside him, patiently teaching him the game's mechanics. When it was time for Daniel's afternoon activities, the boy signed something to Rosa with a shy smile. Rosa smiled back. He says you're getting better. Maybe next time you won't lose so badly. Marcus felt something warm bloom in his chest. I'll practice. Daniel's eyes widened with surprise, then pleasure. He signed something else more animated now. He says he can teach you more games. He has easier ones if you need to start slower. Marcus laughed. I think I need all the help I can get. After Daniel left the room, Marcus sat on the couch, emotionally exhausted in a way he'd never experienced from a day at the office. Rosa began tidying up the living room, her movements efficient and practiced. Thank you, Marcus said suddenly, for today, for translating, for including me. Rosa paused and looked at him directly. Mr. Wellington, I didn't do anything special. I just helped a father talk to his son. That should not require a translator. The words were gentle but firm. Marcus pulled out the notepad paper from his pocket, now creased from being carried around. The sign language class. What time does it start? Rosa's face brightened. Tuesday at 7. It's a beginner class, so you'd fit right in. We start with the alphabet, basic phrases, everyday conversation. How long until I could have a real conversation with Daniel? Rosa considered the question seriously. That depends on how much you practice. But basic communication? You could start right away. A few signs can mean everything to a child who thinks his parent doesn't want to talk to him. The words hit Marcus harder than he expected. Daniel thought his father didn't want to talk to him. Not couldn't, but didn't want to. How long had his son lived with that belief? How many times had Daniel tried to communicate? Only to be met with blank stares and awkward pats on the head. I'll be there Tuesday, Marcus said, his voice rougher than usual. Rosa smiled. Good, bring a notebook. And patience. Learning a new language as an adult is humbling. Marcus Wellington hadn't been humbled in a long time. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be a beginner, to struggle, to fail. His world was one of mastery and control. But as he watched Rosa leave the room, he realized his son lived in that space of struggle every single day, trying to communicate in a world that didn't speak his language. That evening, Marcus did something he'd never done before. He went into Daniel's room at bedtime. Usually Sarah handled the nighttime routine while Marcus worked in his study. But tonight he wanted to try. Daniel was already in his pajamas, sitting on his bed with a book. He looked up in surprise when his father entered. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, feeling out of place in his own son's room. He realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd been in here. The walls were covered with drawings and paintings, Daniel's artwork that Marcus had never taken time to really look at. Marcus pointed to one of the pictures, a colorful scene of a beach with a family. He raised his eyebrows in a question, hoping Daniel would understand. The boy followed his father's gaze and signed something, then grabbed a small whiteboard and marker from his nightstand. He wrote, "This is where I want to go someday. A place where I can hear the ocean." The words made Marcus's throat tight. Daniel couldn't hear the ocean, would never hear waves crashing or seagulls calling, but he still dreamed about it, still wanted to experience it. Marcus took the marker and wrote, "We can go. This summer if you want." Daniel's eyes widened. He looked at his father as if trying to determine if this was a real promise or just empty words. Marcus held his gaze, trying to convey sincerity without words he didn't know how to say. After a moment, Daniel nodded slowly and wrote, "Really?" Marcus wrote back, "Really? You can teach me about the ocean?" A small smile crossed Daniel's face. He erased the board and wrote something else. "Rosa says learning takes time. Are you ready to learn?" The question carried weight beyond a simple beach vacation. Marcus understood what his son was really asking. Was he ready to put in the effort? Was he ready to change? Was he ready to be present? Marcus took the marker and wrote carefully, "Yes, I'm ready." Daniel studied the words for a long moment, then nodded. He set aside the board and lay down, pulling his covers up. Marcus did what he'd seen Sarah do countless times. He tucked the blanket around his son, smoothing it down. On impulse, he leaned down and kissed Daniel's forehead. The boy's eyes drifted closed, and Marcus sat there for a few minutes just watching his son breathe. On Monday, Marcus did something unprecedented. He left work at 5 o'clock. His assistant nearly dropped her phone when he announced he was leaving. Several colleagues stopped mid-conversation as he walked past their offices. Marcus Wellington never left at 5. He arrived before everyone and left after everyone. It was his reputation, his brand, but today he had somewhere more important to be. At home, he found Rosa teaching Daniel how to make cookies. Flour dusted the counter, and chocolate chips were scattered across the kitchen island. When Marcus walked in, Daniel looked at the clock on the wall, then at his father, confusion clear on his face. Rosa signed something to Daniel, and the boy's expression shifted from confusion to cautious pleasure. She then spoke to Marcus. "We're making cookies for his class bake sale. Would you like to help?" Marcus set down his briefcase and rolled up his sleeves. "What do I do?" For the next hour, he learned to measure ingredients, crack eggs without getting shells in the bowl, and form cookie dough into round shapes. Rosa kept up a running commentary in both sign and speech, making sure Daniel was included in every moment. Marcus watched how she did it, how seamlessly she moved between languages, how naturally she communicated. Daniel was more relaxed with his father present than Marcus had ever seen him. The boy would sign something to Rosa, she'd translate, and Daniel would watch his father's reaction. When Marcus made a mess with the flour, Daniel laughed that beautiful, unrestrained laugh. When the first batch of cookies burned because Marcus forgot to set the timer, Daniel signed something that made Rosa grin. "He says you're better at business than baking." Marcus laughed. He's probably right. The evening felt surreal. Marcus couldn't remember the last time he'd done something so ordinary, so domestic. But there was magic in it, in the simple act of making cookies with his son, in being present for something that had nothing to do with money or power or success. After Daniel went to bed, Marcus found Rosa in the kitchen, cleaning up the last of the baking supplies. He poured them both coffee and sat at the kitchen island. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "How did you learn sign language?" Rosa wiped down the counter before answering. "My younger sister was born deaf. In my family, in our culture, everyone learned to sign. It wasn't a question or a debate. She was family, so we learned her language. It was that simple. But the school where you worked, the one that lost funding. Why did you stay in that field? It must not pay well." Rosa looked at him directly. "Mr. Wellington, some things are more important than money. I stayed because those children needed someone who understood them. Because I knew what it felt like to watch my sister light up when someone signed to her. Because communication is not a luxury. It's a basic human need." Marcus felt the rebuke in her words, even though her tone remained gentle. He'd been treating communication with his son as something to outsource, to hire specialists for, rather than something he should do himself. "I've been a coward," he said quietly. Rosa didn't disagree or try to comfort him with false reassurance. "Yes," she said simply, "but cowardice can be cured with courage. The question is whether you're willing to be uncomfortable long enough to learn." Marcus thought about Tuesday's class, about standing in a room full of strangers, fumbling through a language he didn't know. Every instinct told him to delegate this, to hire a private tutor, to learn in the privacy of his home where no one would see him struggle. But he thought about Daniel's face earlier that evening, smiling over cookies, including his father in his world. He thought about all the years he'd missed, all the conversations he'd never had, all the moments lost to his own fear and pride. "I'll be there Tuesday," he said again, more firmly this time. "And I'll keep coming back until I can talk to my son." Rosa smiled, and for the first time, Marcus saw approval in her eyes. "Good. I'll save you a seat in the front row." That night, Marcus lay in bed next to Sarah and told her about his decision to take the class. She was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Do you know what Daniel asked me last week?" He asked if his father was angry with him. "He wanted to know what he did wrong to make you avoid him." The words were like a physical blow. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. all the walls he'd built around his feelings crumbling. God, Sarah, I never meant. I wasn't angry with him. I was just scared, Sarah finished for him. You were scared, I know. But Marcus, our son has been waiting 7 years for his father to stop being scared and start being present. I hope you mean this. I hope you follow through, because if you start this journey and then quit, if you give him hope and then take it away, it will break him in ways I don't know how to fix. Marcus reached for his wife's hand in the darkness. I won't quit. I promise you I won't quit. Tuesday evening arrived too quickly. Marcus left the office at 6, ignoring the surprised looks from his team. He drove to the community center, a modest building in a neighborhood he'd never visited despite living in the city for 20 years. The parking lot was half full of ordinary cars, nothing like the luxury vehicles in his office garage. Inside, the classroom was small and cheerful, with posters of the sign language alphabet on the walls. About 15 people were already there, sitting in a circle of chairs. They ranged in age from teenagers to elderly folks. Marcus recognized the nervous energy of people about to try something new. Rosa stood at the front of the room organizing materials. When she saw Marcus, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. She signed something to the class, and several people turned to look at him with welcoming smiles. Marcus felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he never did in boardrooms. He took a seat in the front row, as Rosa had suggested. A woman in her 60s sat next to him and introduced herself as Margaret. My grandson is deaf, she explained. I'm tired of missing out on his life because I can't talk to him properly. Marcus nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Rosa began the class by explaining that sign language wasn't just hand gestures. It was a complete language with its own grammar, syntax, and cultural components. She emphasized that learning would require patience and practice, that they would make mistakes and look foolish sometimes, but that was okay. The embarrassment was temporary, but the gift of communication was permanent. They started with the alphabet. Rosa demonstrated each letter and the class copied her movements. Marcus's fingers felt clumsy and uncoordinated. He was used to being competent, skilled, in control. This felt like being a child again, struggling to form letters with a pencil. The woman next to him noticed his frustration. I've been coming for 3 weeks, she whispered. It gets easier. The key is to practice every day, even if just for a few minutes. By the end of the 2-hour class, Marcus's hands ached and his brain felt full. They'd learned the alphabet, numbers 1 through 10 and a handful of basic words. Hello. Thank you. Please. Sorry. I love you. Rosa made them practice that last one repeatedly. This is the most important phrase you'll learn, she said, her hands moving gracefully through the signs. Many people in this room have loved ones who have never heard these words in their own language. Tonight, that changes. Marcus practiced the phrase over and over, burning it into his muscle memory. 3 simple signs that carried infinite weight. When class ended, Rosa asked him to stay behind. You did well for your first night, she said, but I want to give you homework beyond the practice sheets. Every day when you come home, I want you to greet Daniel with the sign for hello, and before he goes to bed, I want you to sign I love you. Just those 2 things every single day, no matter how tired you are or how busy you've been. Marcus nodded. I can do that. It will feel awkward at first. Daniel might not trust it immediately. He's learned to expect certain things from you, and changing those expectations takes time, but consistency matters more than perfection. That evening, Marcus came home nervous. Daniel was in the living room reading when Marcus walked in. The boy looked up, registered his father's presence, and started to return to his book. But Marcus stepped into his line of sight and raised his hand. Slowly, carefully, Marcus formed the sign for hello. His fingers felt stiff, uncertain, but he did it. For a moment, Daniel just stared, his eyes wide with shock. Then his small hand came up and signed back, the movement fluid and natural. Hello? Marcus felt something shift inside him, like a door opening after being locked for years. It was just one word, one simple greeting, but it was the first real conversation he'd had with his son in 7 years. Rosa appeared from the kitchen, witnessing the exchange. She smiled but didn't make a big deal of it. She simply signed something to Daniel, who nodded and returned to his book. But Marcus caught the small smile on his son's face, the way the boy's shoulders had relaxed slightly. That night at bedtime, Marcus went to Daniel's room again. The boy was already under the covers watching his father with guarded curiosity. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and took a breath. Then he signed the 3 movements Rosa had drilled into them. "I love you," Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He signed back immediately, the movements emphatic and clear even to Marcus's untrained eyes. Then the boy launched himself forward, wrapping his arms around his father's neck. Marcus held his son, feeling the small body shake with silent sobs. How long had Daniel waited to hear those words in his own language? How many nights had he gone to bed wondering if his father loved him at all? Marcus held him tighter, wishing he could take back all the lost years, all the moments he'd wasted. But he couldn't. He could only move forward. When Daniel finally pulled back, his face was wet but smiling. He signed something complex that Marcus didn't understand, but the emotion behind it was clear. Rosa had followed Marcus upstairs and stood in the doorway. She translated quietly. "He says he's been waiting his whole life for you to say that." Marcus's own eyes burned. He touched Daniel's face gently, then signed the phrase again, slower this time, making sure his son could see every movement. "I love you." Daniel signed it back, and they stayed like that for a long moment, father and son finally speaking the same language. Over the next few weeks, Marcus's life transformed. He attended every Tuesday and Thursday class, practicing during his lunch breaks and commute. He started carrying flashcards in his briefcase. During boring conference calls, he'd practice fingerspelling under the table. His assistant caught him once and looked concerned, but Marcus just smiled and kept practicing. At home, his vocabulary grew slowly but steadily. He could ask Daniel about his day, comment on the weather, discuss what to have for dinner. The conversations were simple, childlike, but they were real. And each one built trust, rebuilt the bridge between father and son that Marcus had let collapse. Rosa was patient, but demanding. When Marcus got lazy with his hand shapes, she corrected him. When he fell back on writing instead of signing, she called him out. "Daniel can read," she said firmly, "but he needs to see you try. He needs to know you think he's worth the effort of learning his language." Sarah watched the transformation with cautious hope. She joined Marcus in practicing, and together they stumbled through conversations with their son. They made mistakes constantly, mixed up signs, got frustrated, but Daniel was patient with them, correcting gently, encouraging them. The boy seemed to grow taller, more confident as his parents learned to speak with him. One evening, about 6 weeks into Marcus's lessons, something remarkable happened. The family was having dinner when Daniel signed something Marcus actually understood without translation. The boy wanted to tell them about a project at school, something about the solar system. Marcus caught maybe half of what Daniel was saying, but he understood enough to ask a follow-up question in sign. Daniel's face lit up like sunrise. He answered, and Marcus understood. They were having a conversation. A real, actual conversation without Rosa translating, without writing things down. Just father and son talking. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes while pretending to cut her food. Rosa sat at the kitchen counter watching with quiet satisfaction. After dinner, Marcus approached her while Daniel and Sarah were loading the dishwasher. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything. For seeing what we couldn't see, for pushing me to be better." Rosa shook her head. "I didn't do anything except show up and do my job. You're the one who chose to change. That takes real courage, Mr. Wellington." "Marcus," he corrected. "Please, just Marcus," she smiled. "Marcus, then. You know, when I first came here, I almost didn't take the job." "Why not?" "Because I've seen too many wealthy families who think love is something you can buy, who hire people to care for their children because they're too busy chasing money. I didn't want to be part of that system." Rosa looked at him directly. "But your wife convinced me. She said you were a good man who was lost. She said you just needed someone to show you the way home." Marcus felt emotion clog his throat. "Sarah said that? She loves you very much. And she loves that boy in there more than anything. She hired me because she was desperate to reach him, but also desperate to save her family." Rosa's expression softened. "I'm glad I listened to her. I'm glad you found your way." The weeks turned into months. Marcus's signing improved dramatically. He could follow most of what Daniel said now, could express complex thoughts, could joke and play and discipline all in sign language. He still made mistakes, still had to ask for clarification sometimes, but the barrier between them had dissolved. Daniel changed too. The quiet, withdrawn boy blossomed into a talkative, energetic child. He told elaborate stories, asked endless questions, argued about bedtimes and homework and everything else normal 7-year-olds argued about. Marcus had never been so happy to be challenged by his son. Work changed for Marcus, too. He left the office by 6 most days. He stopped checking email during dinner. He turned down a major promotion that would have required extensive travel. His colleagues thought he'd lost his mind, but Marcus had never been clearer about his priorities. One Saturday morning, Marcus woke early to find Daniel already up, sitting at the kitchen table with Rosa. They were planning something, their hands moving in excited conversation. When Daniel saw his father, he rushed over and signed rapidly. Marcus caught most of it. Daniel wanted to go to the beach. Not next summer, as Marcus had vaguely promised months ago, but today. Right now. The weather was perfect, Daniel's homework was done, and Rosa had said she knew a quiet beach where they could spend the whole day. Marcus thought about the papers on his desk at home, the emails waiting for responses. Then he looked at his son's eager face and signed back. Yes, let's go. They packed a picnic with Rosa's help, loaded the car, and drove 2 hours to a small beach town Marcus had never visited. The beach was beautiful, stretching out in both directions with soft sand and gentle waves. There were a few other families scattered about, but it was peaceful, not crowded. Daniel ran toward the water immediately, Sarah following to make sure he stayed safe. Marcus helped Rosa carry their things to a good spot. As they set up the umbrella and blankets, Marcus watched his son splash in the shallow waves, arms spread wide, face turned up to the sun. He can't hear the ocean, Marcus said to Rosa. But look how happy he is. Rosa followed his gaze. Happiness isn't about what we can or can't do. It's about being seen, being loved, being included. Daniel is happy because his father brought him to the beach. Because you're here, present, engaged in his life. They spent hours there. Marcus built sandcastles with Daniel, the two of them communicating entirely in sign as they constructed towers and moats. Sarah took photos on her phone, capturing moments Marcus knew he'd treasure forever. When Daniel wanted to bury his father in sand, Marcus let him, laughing as his son piled sand on his legs and decorated him with seashells. Later, they ate sandwiches and fruit while watching the waves. Daniel sat between his parents, content and tired from playing. He signed something to Marcus about the ocean being bigger than he imagined. Marcus agreed and added that some of the best things in life were bigger and more amazing than we expected. Daniel seemed to think about this, then signed a question. Like having a dad who can talk to me? Marcus felt his chest tighten. He signed back carefully. I'm sorry it took me so long. I was afraid and foolish. But I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere. Daniel leaned against his father's shoulder, and they sat like that while Sarah and Rosa talked quietly nearby. Marcus realized this was what happiness felt like, not the rush of closing a business deal or the satisfaction of beating competitors. Just sitting on a beach with his family, communicating without barriers, being present in a simple moment. As the sun started to set, they packed up their things. Daniel was exhausted, falling asleep in the car before they even left the parking lot. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror at his son's peaceful face and felt grateful beyond words. When they got home, Marcus carried Daniel inside and up to bed. The boy woke briefly as Marcus tucked him in. His small hands formed the sign slowly, sleepily. Best day ever, Marcus signed back. For me too. Over the next few months, life settled into a new rhythm. Marcus had reached conversational fluency in sign language. He still took classes with Rosa, but now they were advanced sessions focusing on nuance and cultural aspects of deaf community. He'd also started a scholarship fund to support deaf education programs, inspired by Rosa's stories about the school that had lost funding. Daniel thrived. His grades improved, his confidence soared, and he made new friends. The Wellington House became a gathering place for deaf children and their families. Sarah had suggested it, and Marcus had agreed immediately. Every other Saturday, they hosted game nights where deaf kids could come and play, knowing everyone in the house could sign. Rosa organized these events, and Marcus funded them. He'd watch the children laughing and playing, completely unself-conscious, completely themselves, and feel amazed that his home had become this place of joy and acceptance. Other parents would thank him profusely, but Marcus always deflected. He was the one who should be grateful. These families, these children, had taught him what truly mattered. One evening after a particularly chaotic game night, Marcus sat with Rosa in the kitchen while Sarah put Daniel to bed. They were both exhausted but happy. "I never properly thanked you," Marcus said. "When you first came here, I was lost. I'd built this entire empire, achieved everything I thought mattered, but I'd lost my son in the process. You could have just done your job, collected your paycheck, and moved on. Instead, you challenged me. You pushed me to be better." Rosa was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. I'm leaving." The words hit him like ice water. "What? Why?" "Did we do something wrong? I can double your salary again, give you more time off, whatever you need." Rosa smiled gently. "It's not about money or working conditions. You've been more than generous. But my job here is done. When I took this position, I made a promise to myself. I would stay until Daniel had what he needed. And now he does. He has parents who can communicate with him, who understand him, who prioritize him. He has a home full of love and acceptance. He doesn't need me anymore." "But we need you," Marcus protested. "You're part of this family." "I'll always be part of your lives," Rosa assured him. "I'll still teach the classes, still come to the game nights. But you don't need a full-time interpreter anymore. Daniel needs his parents, not a buffer between you. And there are other families out there, other children who need what I gave to Daniel. I've already accepted a position with a family who has a deaf daughter. The parents work 3 jobs between them and can't afford classes. I'm going to live with them and teach them the way I taught you." Marcus understood, even though it hurt. Rosa wasn't just an employee. She was a calling personified. She moved through the world finding children who needed a voice and parents who needed guidance, and she gave both freely. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked. 2 weeks. "I want to make sure the transition is smooth." Those 2 weeks passed too quickly. The Wellington family threw Rosa a party, inviting everyone from the sign language classes and the game nights. The small community center was packed with people whose lives Rosa had touched. There were speeches and tears and laughter. Daniel gave Rosa a painting he'd made, a portrait of her teaching, her hands mid-sign, her face full of patience and love. Rosa cried when she saw it, signing to Daniel that she would treasure it forever. The boy hugged her tightly, and Marcus had to look away, his own eyes burning. On Rosa's last day, the house felt different. Daniel was at school and Sarah was out running errands. Marcus found Rosa in the kitchen, packing the last of her things. They'd talked about this moment, prepared for it, but it still felt surreal. "I've written down some resources for you," Rosa said, handing him a folder. "Other families in the deaf community, support groups, cultural events. Daniel should grow up knowing he's part of something bigger than just your family." Marcus took the folder, nodded. "We'll make sure he stays connected. I know you will." "You're not the same man I met 6 months ago, Marcus." That man was hiding from his own son. "You're present now. You see Daniel for who he is, not what he lacks." "I wish I'd changed sooner," Marcus admitted. "I wasted so many years." "You can't change the past," Rosa said firmly. "But you can build a better future. And that's exactly what you're doing." They heard the front door open. Daniel was home from school earlier than expected. He came into the kitchen and saw Rosa's packed bags. His face fell and his hands moved in a question. Was she really leaving? Rosa knelt down to his level and signed her answer. Yes, she was leaving, but not because she didn't love him. She was leaving because other children needed help, the way he had needed help. And now that he had parents who could talk with him, truly talk with him, he didn't need her to stay anymore. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He signed that he didn't want her to go, that he would miss her. Rosa signed back that she would miss him too, but that this wasn't goodbye forever. She would see him at classes, at the game nights, and he could call her anytime he needed to talk. Then Daniel asked a question that made everyone in the room go still. He asked if she was leaving because he hadn't been good enough, because he'd done something wrong. Rosa's face crumpled with emotion. She pulled Daniel into a fierce hug and signed over his shoulder so he could see her hands. You are perfect exactly as you are. You are smart and kind and funny and creative. I'm leaving because my job is to help families find their way to each other. Your family found their way. That's not failure, sweetheart. That's success. Daniel pulled back and looked at his father, who had tears running down his face. Marcus knelt beside Rosa and signed to his son. She's right. You are perfect. And I'm sorry I didn't see that sooner. I'm sorry I didn't try harder to talk with you. But I promise you I will never stop trying now. I will never stop learning your language, your world. You are my son and I love you more than anything in this world. Daniel looked between his father and Rosa, processing. Then he signed something that made both adults smile through their tears. He said that if Rosa had to help other kids, he understood, because every kid should have what he had now. Every kid should have parents who could talk to them. The wisdom of a 7-year-old understanding sacrifice and love in ways most adults never managed. Rosa kissed the top of Daniel's head and stood. She looked at Marcus and signed her final words to him. Words he understood perfectly now. Take care of each other, Marcus signed back. We will. Thank you for everything. Rosa left the Wellington house that afternoon, but her impact remained in every corner. In the sign language books on the shelf, in the visual alarm system they'd installed, in the way the family communicated at dinner, in the community they'd built around their son. That night, Marcus sat with Daniel on the couch reading a story together. Marcus signed the words as he read, and Daniel corrected his grammar when needed. They laughed together, and Marcus marveled at how natural this felt now, how easy communication had become once he'd stopped being afraid. Sarah joined them, curling up on Marcus's other side. She signed a question. Are we okay? Marcus looked at his wife, at his son, at the life they'd built together despite his mistakes. He signed back without hesitation. We're more than okay. We're exactly where we need to be. Months passed, then a year. Daniel turned 8 with a huge party full of deaf and hearing children, all communicating freely. Marcus had become something of an advocate for deaf education, using his business connections to raise awareness and funding. He'd discovered a passion he never knew existed, a purpose beyond profit margins. One evening, Marcus received a call from Rosa. She was working with another family now, teaching a 5-year-old deaf girl and her parents. The mother had asked Rosa how she'd learned to be so patient, so effective. Rosa had told her about the Wellington family, about a wealthy man who'd been too afraid to talk to his own son until a maid showed him the way. She wants to know if you'd be willing to talk to her husband, Rosa said. He's struggling the way you did, hiding behind work, avoiding the hard parts of parenting a deaf child. I thought maybe hearing your story might help. Marcus didn't hesitate. Of course. Give him my number. He talked to that father for 2 hours, sharing his own journey from avoidance to engagement. He was honest about his failures, his fears, his shame, but he also shared the joy he'd found on the other side of that fear. The relationship he now had with his son, built on real communication and understanding. The man cried on the phone, confessing he felt like a failure as a father. Marcus told him what Rosa had taught him, that acknowledging the problem was the first step to solving it. That learning sign language wouldn't be easy, but loving your child should always be worth the effort. After that call, more came. Rosa gave Marcus his contact information to other struggling parents. He found himself becoming an informal mentor, sharing his story again and again. Some people asked why someone so wealthy and successful would spend his time talking to strangers about parenting. Marcus's answer was always the same. I spent the first 7 years of my son's life being rich and successful and completely disconnected from what mattered. I won't make that mistake again. If my story helps even one parent find their way to their child sooner than I did, then it's worth every minute. Daniel thrived in school, making honor roll and joining the drama club. He wanted to be an actor, using sign language to tell stories on stage. Marcus and Sarah supported him completely, attending every performance, learning theater sign vocabulary, becoming part of the deaf theater community. On Daniel's 9th birthday, Marcus gave him a special gift. It was a journal with a note written on the first page. To my son, thank you for waiting for me to find my way to you. Thank you for forgiving me when I was lost. Thank you for teaching me that the most important language is the language of love. Every day with you is a gift I almost missed. I will be grateful for the rest of my life that I found my way home. Daniel read the note and looked up at his father with shining eyes. He signed a question. Do you remember when you couldn't talk to me? Marcus nodded. I remember. I remember feeling lost and scared and not knowing how to reach you. I remember too, Daniel signed. I remember thinking you didn't love me, that I was too different, too much trouble. Marcus felt his heart break at the confession. I always loved you. I just didn't know how to show it in a way you could understand. Daniel smiled and signed something that made Marcus's eyes fill with tears. But you learned. That's what matters. You learned my language because you love me." They hugged, father and son, both fluent now in the most important language of all. The language of connection, of effort, of showing up even when it's hard. The language that Rosa had taught them was possible if they were just brave enough to try. Years later, Marcus would look back on the day Rosa Martinez walked into their home and recognize it as the moment everything changed, not because she was magical or perfect, but because she saw what no one else had bothered to see. She saw a child desperate to be understood and parents desperate to understand. She saw a family trapped on opposite sides of a barrier they didn't know how to cross, and she built them a bridge. But the real miracle wasn't Rosa. It was Marcus, finally, finding the courage to walk across that bridge, to be vulnerable, to be wrong, to be a beginner, to put his ego aside and learn his son's language instead of expecting his son to navigate the world alone. The wealthy man who once couldn't communicate with his deaf child became a father who could discuss anything with his son. The boy who once thought his father didn't love him grew into a young man who knew beyond any doubt that he was cherished. And the black maid who'd communicated in sign language became a guardian angel in their family story, the catalyst for transformation. But Rosa would never take credit for the change. She'd say she just showed them what was possible. The Wellingtons did the rest, choosing love over fear, connection over convenience, presence over pride. They proved that it's never too late to learn, never too late to change, never too late to become the parent your child needs you to be. Daniel's painting of Rosa still hung in their home, a reminder of the woman who'd seen their potential when they couldn't see it themselves, and every time Marcus looked at it, he remembered the most important lesson she'd taught him, that paying attention to your child isn't optional, that learning their language, whatever that language might be, isn't a favor you do for them. It's the foundation of love itself. And every child deserves a parent willing to build that foundation, brick by brick, sign by sign, day by day, until the connection is unbreakable.